Hello everyone, now let's talk about SQL injection. So SQL injections are one of the most popular server-side injection attacks. So in SQL injection, attacker tries to inject SQL query as input, and if the web application is not sanitizing the user input, then that query is being executed on the database, and if that query is successfully being executed on the database, then the attacker can dump all the data from that database. So with the help of SQL injection, the attacker can insert something, update something, and even delete something from that remote database. So SQL injection is of various types like error-based SQL injection, blind SQL injection, time-based, and Boolean. So depending upon the SQL injection which attacker have found, so we can retrieve the data. Now let's see how we can inject SQL queries inside the web applications.
Now let's see how SQL injection works. In order to test SQL injection vulnerability, we have to start our OWASP broken web application. So here you can see that the OWASP broken web application is up and running. So let me open my Firefox and let's start Bricks vulnerable web application, which is inside OWASP BWA. So here you will find the OWASP Bricks link. Just click over that link. Let's go here and let's select content pages. So here you will see there are total 6 content pages and all of them are vulnerable to SQL injection. But for the time being, for this course, I'll cover the content page 1 as the basics one. So let me open this up. So as I told you earlier that in this video I'm going to cover error-based SQL injection, in which we will dump the database through an SQL error. So before testing any application, we first have to find the logic behind that application, that how that application is working and what kind of queries are executing at the backend. Now let's try to play with this application or with this page. So here you will see that this page is showing us the detail of users, user ID 0 and user name along with the user email, and here you will find a SQL query which is being used for retrieving this information. As Bricks is a vulnerable web application, so it's showing us the SQL query which is executing at the backend, but when you will test the real-time web application, you will see nothing. So if we look at the URL, here we find an additional parameter called as ID, and the value 0 is given to ID. Now let's try to give any integer values. Okay, so it's giving us an error again that user does not exist. So the first part of finding a SQL injection is to fuzz the application. So what's the fuzzing means? The fuzzing means giving an weird input to the web application so that we can be able to break the SQL query which is executing at the backend. So here you can see that I have given and long integer values and alphanumeric numbers, but we are not able to break the query. So now what we can do, if I just write here id equals 3, you will see a user details which has id 3, and by just looking at this query we can understand that it's actually retrieving a data from the database whose ID user is 3. Now in order to break the SQL query, let's add a single quote and let's see what happens. So here you will see that we are successfully able to break the SQL query, and here you can see the SQL error. Now What are the other ways to break the SQL queries? We can also add double quotes. Okay, once again we are able to break the query. Now instead of double quotes, we can add backslash. So backslash is used for escaping characters in MySQL. So here you can see that backslash also works. So backslash, single quote and double quotes will work depend upon the application logic, because sometimes a single quote will work and double quote will not work. Sometimes backslash will work and both of them, single quote and double quote, will not work. So the main thing we have to find is the application logic. Now once we completed this part, then the next step is we have to try to remove this error, or we have to try to patch this query, but the condition should be the single quote should be remain present. Now how to do so? So just for an example, so here you can see our SQL error. So let me copy the last line of the SQL error and let me paste it in my notepad file, and then we will analyze that how this application is receiving our input. Now instead of single quotes, let's try to add double quotes. So let me copy this line again and paste it in my notepad file. Now let's add a backslash sign and let's copy this thing and paste it here. So let me remove this extra characters which we now need. So here is our input: a single quote, a double quote and a backslash sign. So let me remove this limit one also, so that we can understand the logic better. Let me give it. So here you can see whatever input a user is giving, the user input is enclosed by two single quotes. Here you can see. So if I just give 1 as an input, then my 1 will get enclosed in single quotes. Now how we are able to break the SQL query? Here you can see that we are able to break the SQL query, but how it works? So let me write here a sample demo query, that is select star from table where user ID equals, and just for example, this is the query which is executing at the backend, single quotes and again single quote, and here is our input, ID number is 1. So this is how our application is treating our input. So whatever user is giving is getting enclosed in these single quotes. So if we add a single quote after 1, here you can see. So if we just add any single quote or a double quote after 1, so we are successfully able to break the query. How? Because here you can see that now our application will think that this query ends here due to this single quote, and this single quote will remain as a empty. This makes no sense. So that's why we are able to see this error. Now how we can think of to remove this error? So what if the user or a pen tester will add a single quote before 1 also? Now what will happen is we will successfully able to make this query as an empty. Here you can see there is a no value, and between this point we can execute our own SQL query. So now let's do this thing. So let me just add a single quote first. Okay. Now before 3, let me add a single quote again and let's see how it works. Okay. So here you will see that we are successfully able to remove the error, and here you can also see that our single quotes are still present. Now the next thing we have to do is we have to comment out the rest of query. So in order to comment out the rest of query, we can just give two hyphen signs and a plus sign. So here the plus sign is actually used for giving a one single space, because we are not interacting with the database directly, we are interacting with the database through this front end. So there are some constraints or rules which we have to follow. So that's why after these two comments we have to give one space, but we can use plus sign because it's also used as a one space. And here at this point we can execute our own SQL query and we'll try to fetch out the data from database. So in order to check that whether we are able to execute SQL query or not, let's try to write a simple and 101 statement. So if I just write here and 1 equals 0, so this condition is not true, 1 equals 0. So now if I just hit enter, you will see nothing, user does not exist. But if I just enter here and 1 equals 1, so here you will see that the details comes back, which means now we are successfully able to execute SQL query here. Now let me open one notepad file and let's just recap what we have discussed. So the first thing in order to find the SQL injection is we have to find business, we have to find application logic. So once we find the application logic, the next step is we have to break the SQL query through fuzzing. So as I told you earlier, that fuzzing means giving a weird input to the application and try to break the application logic. So once we are able to break the query, the next thing is to remove the error or to patch SQL query. Till here at this point, remove the error and patch SQL query. We have completed this till here. Now the next step is find out how many number of columns are being used by this application. So now let's find that how many columns are being used by this application. So in order to find columns, there is one function in MySQL called as order by. Now let's use that function. So let's just write order by and let's start with 2. So if I just hit enter, you will see nothing, there is no error, which means there are 2 columns which are being used by this web application, that's bricks. Now let's add here 5 and let's see whether we got an error or not. Okay, there is no error, means there are 5 columns which are being used. Now let's add here 7. So we have to go on increasing the number so that we can able to find a correct columns. Okay, you can see there is no error, means there are 7 columns. Now let's add here 9. Okay, so here you will see that we got an error and it's saying column 9 in order clause, means there are total 8 columns which are present in the database of bricks web application. Let's cross check. So let's add here 8 and you will see a no error, which means there are total 8 columns which are being used by this bricks web application. Now the next step is we will use a union statement in order to concatenate the previous query. So we want to execute this previous query and our new query also. So that's why this function union is used. So I'll just write down here union select and all the column numbers. So if I just hit enter, you will see there is no error, which means this part is executing successfully. Now the next thing we have to do is we have to find that how many columns are being used by this application for our query. So now we know that there are total 8 columns in this bricks database, but now we want to know that among these 8 columns, how many columns are actually being used by this query. So by just looking at the details, we can just do a guess that there are 3 columns, because there are 3 values here. You can see user ID, username and email. So we can just think of that out of 8 columns, there are total 3 columns which are being used by this bricks web application, or in this query, a single this query. Now in order to cross check that how many columns are working, what we have to do is, so here you can see our ID and we have given it 3 value. So let's give any random value or any fictitious value. Let me just give here 6 7, a wrong value, and hit enter, and let's see what happened. So here you will see that instead of user ID, username and email, we'll see here 1, 2 and 3, which means the first 3 columns are being used by this application and for this page where we are currently right in. Now we got our execution point. Now what we can do is, so we first of all we can find a database name by using database function instead of the first column. So now if I just hit enter, you will find the database name, and the database name is bricks. So we can also execute any SQL command in the place of this second column, because the first, second and third columns are being used. So now let's find the username of this database by writing user and 2 parentheses, and at here the second point you can see the username is bricks@localhost. Now let's try to find the database path by writing @data dir, hit enter, and in the third one you will see the database directory, which is var/lib/mysql. Now the next step is we have to find the table name, because now we know that what's the database name. The database name is bricks. So let me open one more notepad file and let's write here that what we have retrieved. So database name we have found it is, database name is bricks. Let's go here. So the next thing we have to do is we have to find the table name. We have to find the table name. Now let me write a query. Let me write a simple query which we will use in order to find the table name. So here is the query: select table underscore name from information underscore schema dot tables, where table underscore schema equals our database name, which is bricks in our case. So by just looking at this query, we can come to know that this means select table name from information schema dot tables, where table schema is our database name. So if you are new to MySQL and you don't know that what's the information schema, so let me just tell you that what's the information schema is. So information schema is actual standard way to store and retrieve the data in database. So it's also a generic template which all the web developer have to follow while creating their databases. So now let's try to execute this query and let's see whether we are able to find the table names which is present inside this Bricks web application or not. So let me remove this database user and data dir. Okay, there is one error. Let's find. Okay, so I removed this select statement. Okay, so now there is no error. Now let's try to execute this query. So I have already written union select. So let's start it from table underscore name. Now we will write this table underscore name only in the first column. So this will display here, and the rest of the query we have to write after 8. So table name from information underscore schema dot tables, where table underscore schema equals the database name, which is Bricks. Now if I just hit enter, we will see that we are successfully able to retrieve the database name, the table name, which is users. Here you can see the table name users. Now as we know that the database contains lot of tables, but here we can see only one table, that is users. So in order to find all the table names which is present inside this application, there are two ways. The first one is we can use limit function, and the second one is we can use group concat function. So let's see that how group concat function works. So before table name, just write down group underscore concat, and let's enclose this table name inside these parentheses. Hit enter, and here you can see that we are still able to see this users table name, which means there is only one table which is present inside this Bricks database. So let's go back to our notepad file. So we are successfully able to retrieve the database name, which is Bricks, and the table name which we found is users. Now let's go back. So now we are successfully able to find the database name and the table name. Then the next thing we can find is we can find the column names. So in order to find column names which is present inside the users tables, what is the SQL query? So the query for finding the column name is select column underscore name from information underscore schema dot columns, where table underscore name equals the table name which we found, which is users. So this is the SQL query which we will use to find out the column names. So let me edit this previous query. So instead of table name, let me just write down here column name. And here you can see that I am still using this group concat function, which means this function will display all the column names which is present inside this Bricks web application database. So from information schema dot columns, where table underscore name equals users. Now if I just hit enter, here you will find a long list of columns which are present inside the user table of Bricks web application database. You can see there are long list of the columns including username, password, user ID, log names, password again, first name, last name, user ID, admin, reset code, and so on and so forth. Let me just go back here, So now we are successfully able to find the column names and the database name and the table name. Now what we can do is we can fetch out the data which is present inside a particular column name. Like if you want to fetch the email IDs which is present inside this email column, then our query is very simple. So the query is select email. So you have to write down select followed by the column name. This is email. Select email from, and here we have to write down the table name which is users. So it's a very small query, you can see here. So let me write here select email inside the group concat because I want to retrieve all the emails. So email from users. So let me remove this long query from users, which is our table name. Now if I just hit enter, you will see all the email accounts which are associated with this database. You can see Tom, Ron and Harry. So same like email, we can also find the passwords of these accounts. Okay, I think the passwords is not a correct name of a column, it's password. Okay, and here you will see the password admin, Tom, Ron, and it's kind of some hash. So now you can find out all the data which is present in different columns by just repeating this query. So this was whole the process of SQL injection, that how we can execute a SQL query and we can dump the data from the database. So in this video we have covered that what's a SQL injection and how we can find a SQL injection vulnerability in web application and how we can retrieve data from SQL injection vulnerability. Thanks for watching this video.